You know how we always say South Africa is a movie? Well, this week, South Africa has been a movie. Jacob Zuma, by mistake, had a terrible slip of the tongue at just the wrong moment. A massive South African propaganda campaign has been exposed to be nonsense. And one of South Africa's most famous names is the latest to be embroiled in a fake qualification scandal. So let's bring you up to speed. This is actually the first episode of something brand new that we're doing on The Issue with Dan Corder called News Worth Knowing. Once a week, we will release a News Worth Knowing episode where we look back at the last 7 days and pick out 3 big stories, ones that really matter, and we figure out what we need to know and what is really going on. All episodes of News Worth Knowing are also on our podcast. You can catch it on any streaming site that you like to use. Deeper analysis of the biggest news stories facing South Africa. Right, let's get into it because South Africa is a movie. Welcome to the watch party. And before we get into those 3 big news stories, a little bit of exciting news from us, The Issue, because we have finally launched our Patreon. Exclusive to Patreon, every single week we are going to release an episode interviewing an expert on a big news story or serious challenge facing South Africa. It's the deep cut with the people who really know what they're talking about. And just yesterday, we launched the first one with none other than South African economist Brindy Kreft. She is an expert in South Africa's labor market and chats to us about why we have such a massive unemployment crisis in this country, why it's record breaking all around the world, why we are just worse at employing people and making jobs than anybody else. So head across to Patreon. It costs you just $5 a month, which is about 1991 Rand. That money goes towards developing this show, The Issue, and you get that exclusive interview every single week. So let's start with Jacob Zuma's monster mess up. If you've been living under a rock the size of a months-long festive non-stop bender, you might not know that Jacob Zuma stabbed the ANC in the back just last December, calling their current leadership sellouts and apartheid collaborators, saying that no one should vote for the ANC, and actually saying that he would campaign for a brand new political party called the MK Party, short for Umkhonto weSizwe. And then just a few days ago, Jacob Zuma was in full flow. He was giving a rousing speech about change and the revolution and saving South Africa, and he said, if you want to do those things, what you need to do is vote the ANC. Sorry. That's the political equivalent of taking out somebody on a date, spending the whole dinner complaining about your ex, saying the worst person ever, they ruined your life, you don't want anything to do with them anymore, you don't have any feelings for them, they can go to hell, they're terrible, and then shouting out your ex's name to this date later that night in bed. The hardwired programming is going to need to be untied for Zuma if he's going to continue to campaign for MK. Second piece of news worth knowing for the week actually involves a massive propaganda campaign originating in South Africa that was exposed as total nonsense and a fraud this week. And the story is actually really sad. You may have heard about Nadine Terblance and her 9-year-old son Joandre, who were brutally killed allegedly by somebody wielding an axe about a month ago in Alberton. Terrible story. And in the wake of that, their gardener, a black man, was arrested on suspicion of committing the murder. And immediately, a bunch of different accounts on Twitter, including one very prominent one called End Wokeness, kicked into gear and started tweeting more or less the same tweet. They tweeted about this awful double murder. Then they made it clear that it was the gardener and implied the race dynamic there between 2 white people getting killed by a black person, and then quoted, "Kill the Boer is just a song," implying that this was part of this conspiracy theory of white people being genocidally wiped out and killed by black people across South Africa. Something which has no credible evidence whatsoever, but there is this specific, targeted, calculated, malicious campaign online from a bunch of different accounts trying to sell this narrative of this alleged, non-existent genocide of white people in South Africa. And those tweets went all around the world. And that was the story that they believed was true. But everyone should have stopped and thought to themselves, this guy has just been accused, the gardener. We don't know his motive if he did it, but he hasn't even been convicted of doing it yet. And then, just a few days ago, Nadine's boyfriend, Freddie Stapelberg, was arrested on suspicion of killing them both. And the charges are credible. He's already appeared in court. But the point here is that the damage has already been done in a case which is clearly not a case of black people going after white people in South Africa. It's clearly not a case of this alleged non-existent white genocide thing. But I'm sad because this update, this news of the serious allegations of the boyfriend will not travel as far as the initial propaganda implying that there was a race war and that a black South African had killed 2 white South Africans brutally with an axe. It's not going to do that kind of mileage whatsoever. And it just feels like it's too late. The damage is done, and that's really awful because there are probably hundreds of thousands to millions of people around the world who swallowed that initial news as true news and will never hear about this and have just accepted that as part of a truthful narrative of their reality and are all the much closer to being duped into believing this conspiracy theory. The people behind them who did this exploited and extracted maximum value from Nadine and her son's deaths. That's what they did. They knew when the gardener was arrested that the gardener hadn't been convicted. We didn't know the motive, but they knew that if they assembled black gardener arrested, even though not convicted, and white South Africans killed, they'd be able to imply and spin a narrative that was unbelievably damaging and worked into this nonsense conspiracy. But you need to know that. We need to tell everybody that. So that's why it's news worth knowing. And our final story concerns another fake qualification scandal in South Africa. I don't know what it is. Maybe that's the real pandemic now in Mzansi. But this isn't like a Matthew Lani case. This isn't someone pretending that they bought like a Bachelor of Arts at an online university that actually doesn't exist. This involves somebody iconic, very famous and very powerful. Her name is Thabi Leoka, and for decades she has been an inspirational, highly lauded economist and an inspiration particularly in the fact that she's a black woman in a field where in general it's dominated by white men and has not been opened up to people of color or women yet, or very often at all. Leoka came to prominence in the 2000s as a young South African who had got an extremely impressive education from top English universities, the London School of Economics, and it seems like also the University of London, although it gets confusing. She became known for having a PhD from LSE, the London School of Economics, and she became a massive deal, a director at MTN, a director at Anglo American. She is currently on the President's Economic Advisory Council, the presidency of the whole of South Africa, which is why in the last 2 days it's been the biggest scandal in the nation, because it seems like there is no evidence to suggest that she got that PhD. She's been accused of lying, making up the whole thing. It seems like she may have got a master's from LSE or something like that, but definitely not a PhD. People have searched high and low. There's no trace on the internet whatsoever. And if she is lying, I never understand it when people do this. She decided to do a media interview to, I guess, try and save her reputation. I understand doing a media interview to try and defend your good name in public, but surely if you're lying, you go in and you do that interview with a good story. Leoka did not do that at all. In a radio interview on Tuesday, she said, no, this is all just a massive misunderstanding. You don't get it. I used a different name on my PhD at the London School of Economics. Leoka claims that she has a different name or another set of names that she doesn't use in public, and that was the one used at LSE, and she doesn't want to give out that name. So the radio host said, well, can you give us that name in private, off air, and then our producers will use that in the search to try and find your PhD? And she said, sure. And then later in the same interview, the presenter said, my producers have searched under that other name you've given me. It's nowhere. There's no trace of your PhD. And then the university got contact and they were like, no, we have no idea about this PhD. And the evidence just screams that she's lying. I mean, really, like, if you come out and try to defend your good name in the wake immediately of allegations, you really need to have your story straight if it's a lie, or hard facts if it's the truth. And she had nothing. She didn't send us or hasn't shown us her PhD if it does exist. She didn't have evidence like emails when she was doing her PhD. She didn't have pictures from a graduation ceremony. And this actually has serious consequences, because if Leoka is lying, she lied about this under oath. In 2017, she was part of a commission where she swore under oath that she had completed a PhD at LSE and the University of London. That just happened. And now it seems like it hasn't. And the cherry on top was when she said, oh no, Daily Maverick, a news publication in South Africa, asked me about this weeks ago and they were satisfied. And then Wednesday morning, Daily Maverick's top headline was, No, we didn't. We weren't satisfied. We continually have been asking her for the last few weeks for comment and proof, and she has evaded us. She's been elusive and unhelpful. So actually, we absolutely are not satisfied, and it looks like this is just, in their words, a PhD from the figment of her imagination. So that's news worth knowing on the issue with Dan Corder for this week. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back in another few days with another brand new episode on an issue facing South Africa. Go check out our Patreon with that interview about unemployment in South Africa I told you about, featuring Brindy Kreft. And also, if you want to know more about Jacob Zuma's massively consequential fight with the ANC, we have just done an episode on that too. You can find it on podcast and YouTube. Thank you for joining us. See you soon.